Good morning. Here we are again with another video installment of my progress on this 42 Lincoln Continental. Sort of a barn find here. And today, I'll show you some of the progress. Still got quite a bit of work going on here. You can see we have the rear axles out, but those of you not seen a Ford rear end of this era, that's what they look like, all one piece, the drive shaft, everything. But that's now all been kind of gone through, resealed, new bearings and seals, fresh fluids in it. We'll kind of say lightly overhauled and put back together, and this is actually how they look when they go back in the car. This is how they come out, and this is how they have to go back in. And I didn't exactly take it out this way, but it's now ready to go back in. And one of the things I'll point out here on video today, because it was in the last, I believe the last video I did on this car. Take a roll under here. It's a little hard to see under here, but there is that rear suspension cross member that holds the spring. And these little mounts here, I kind of repaired them and repadded them with new rubber. And we drilled through the frame, through the mounts, the cross member, the little cross member, and the frame, and installed 4 very heavy-duty safety bolts all the way through to retain that cross member in place. Up until then, only thing that held it was just vulcanized rubber mounts, which is not good. And I've had experience with those in the past on Ford cars, and I think I've replaced motor mounts on every Ford car I ever had that type of design. But you can see this is kind of what they look like. They're a little empty without a torque tube and a drive shaft in here, but this car's pretty good underneath too. Has a lot of undercoating, but it does not have rust. And then open this up. Today I'll be working on getting the rest of this hooked back up, but here's the transmission is now finally back in the car. After much fun getting the pressure plate and clutch back in the back of the engine, due to galled threads and somewhat not completely stripped bolts, but a good go around a couple times with a tap to solve the problem, and new bolts, which you can actually buy. A plug for Summit Racing, who actually had the correct ones on the shelf in the store, so I went out there and grabbed a set for your pressure plates. Something I actually kind of recommend because they have a tendency to gall out, and I've seen that before. But whoever worked on this car at least 1 or 2 times that it's been apart, we figure at least twice. Obviously it was a little bit rough-handed the way they put it together. Even the transmission mount bolts that are down here, even those had to be replaced. I had to chase the threads down in the frame because they were galled and kind of stripped a little bit. Not bad, not to the point where I actually had to drill them and put a new thread size, but had to straighten them out a little bit. And then I'm going to come around this side of the car. So we can see some of this, and I'll even see if I can roll underneath. But here is the bell housing adapter that was, you can see part of it. There's actually part inside as well to retain the transmission. We left out 1 bolt out of the 8. We now have 7. When I originally took it apart, it was just these 4 at the top here that were holding it in, and absolutely nothing else. And that's because this had a Liquimatic drive, and the shape of the oil pan on the bottom is different because the bell housing on a Liquimatic is a little bigger at the bottom, probably to accommodate a torque converter. But anyhow, rather than try to find an oil pan, and just taking the oil pan off this engine with it the way it's configured in this car is really not an easy job, especially with the transmission out and the car's nose against the wall. But it was just easier to make an adapter plate to resolve the problem. And I think what we'll do here, we'll get the old creeper here and I'll roll under from this side. Close that up. Show you what I've done under here to resolve this problem. If it can be, I'm not sure if this is going to show real well on camera or not. It's kind of actually a tight place, but right there's the bottom of it. You can see where I've actually made a steel plate, and then inside there's a series of there's 3 tabs that are bolted inside of it to catch the 3 transmission bolts on this side and on the bottom, and that resolved the problem of stability. It took a bit of pattern making and some very careful calculation, but it fit perfectly when I put it in. So but that's where we're at with that. And now we're basically beginning the rest of the reassembly. We'll be putting all the linkages and everything back on, the clutch linkage, all etc., and then put the rear end back in. Speaking of which, putting the rear end back in, something else I'll point out on camera because I'm looking right at it. The Ford universal joints. You got to be very careful when you buy these that you make sure that it makes full contact all the way in and tight against the bearing in the rear of the transmission. If it's sloppy, it will damage the bearing, it can damage the shaft, and actually effectively ruin a transmission. And I saw a couple of these posts on Facebook, people cautioned me about these U-joints when getting a replacement. And I found one that is actually for a Ford rather than the Lincoln one. It's a little bit lighter duty, but it's still a pretty hefty housing, and I don't plan on going out doing burnout contests with this car. I just don't think these would do a terribly good burnout anyway. I don't roughhouse my stuff. But going to be making, I just have to make one shim to put in front of it, inside in here, down in up against the bearing, because I want to bring the universal joint, I want to actually bring it back a little bit. The Ford housing is a little bit shorter, and I want to keep this is the cross that has actually got the splines on it for the transmission, and I want to keep my center line of this universal joint, this part of the universal joint, centric with where the original was, which I have, and I was able to get a measurement on it. And the only difference is about 90 thousandths of an inch, but 90 thousandths may not sound like much, but 90 thousandths is enough to possibly cause bind. So I figure if we at least do that, do good practice to get it centric where it was, it should perform just fine otherwise. And that's the only thing different I could really see on it. Everything else will line right up, everything will slide right together. I've already test fitted it on both ends, so that should work out pretty good. Hopefully I won't have to take this apart again, but we still have quite a few pieces, parts in those boxes back there yet to put on. Some of that will go on today, so that'll be kind of nice to see some of these boxes empty out. But we basically are replacing all of the brake hydraulic system on the car, new master cylinder, wheel cylinders, brake hoses. As a matter of fact, there's a seller on eBay that sells these. I'm actually going to be using braided stainless. These are actually custom made for this car, and the company that I get these from on eBay makes them for everything. I believe it's called Just Brakes or Just Brake Hoses, and they sell pretty much exclusively through eBay. I'll give them a plug. And of course, my friends at Speedway, they were actually very helpful. There was a lot of good parts I got there too as well. And pretty much this car parts-wise is, I almost would dare say to call it a cakewalk to get parts for mechanically if you know what interchanges with other Ford cars. This is actually the first of this type of Ford car I've ever had, of one this old. But I know that everything behind the engine is basically Ford truck, and that's really obvious when you start looking at the parts. But that's what interchanges with it. And other than that, that's kind of, we'll give you a little nice backup view here of what it looks like without the back end under it anyway, and the back's off of it. But all of that will be going back together pretty soon, so just thought I'd throw out a video to show some of the progress, and we'll be making more as it goes along. And with that, everyone stay safe out there and have a great day. Thank you.